Here we go. Welcome everyone to Education Today. I'm your host, Scott Noons, and I have my good buddy Bryon Carpenter with me today, joining from Canada, British Columbia, right?
That's correct, Scott.
Yeah, Abbotsford to be more precise. So I know that is like an hour east of the Olympics there.
Yeah, Vancouver.
Again, Vancouver.
Yes.
And for those that don't know you, just kind of quickly tell us a little bit about yourself. And then I want to talk about your latest endeavor, Fresh Air at 5, or you've been doing it for a while, but
Right on.
We'll get into it.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Scott, for having me this afternoon on Education Today. Super psyched to be here and that we can chat about our favorite thing in the world, which is, making a difference in people's lives, right? So I've been an educator now for 12 years. And prior to that, I was a research scientist at a pharmaceutical company. And I've been here at the school that I'm currently at, teaching in an online and a blended learning environment for the past 11 years. So that's what I've been doing. And I do have a podcast, as you can see, called Fresh Air at 5, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So that's a little bit about me. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a fisherman, I am a creative person, and that's a bit about me.
Yeah, very creative person indeed. And in preparation for the episode, I was listening to My EdTech Life with our buddy Fonz, and great episode. I still need to finish it up, but I've heard your kind of like origin story a bunch of times. So I've heard you tell it on my podcast before. So for those that haven't listened to the episode, I'll put the long URL up here for a moment, but the episode came out on March 8th. You can just go to anchor.fm/ed today to listen to that complete episode to hear the full journey. But in short, you're a chemist turned teacher. But what I didn't know beforehand or had forgotten was that you were looking to be a missionary or were a missionary before. And I thought, that's like one more thing we kind of have in common, because I started out as a graphic designer, then got into education. So had this career before education like you. We're both bearded brothers, right? We have that going on. And I don't know if I've shared with you, before I got into education, I was actually working on a master's in biblical theology. So
no kidding.
We kind of have that same kind of interest in one more area. So
that's right, for sure, exactly. So right out of high school, I was headed to Bible college it was going to be like 7 years, and then while I was there, my first year, I had a change of mind and a change of direction, and it was all fine. And I stepped into university, started studying science, and haven't changed directions on my faith whatsoever. But I have, I'm a public school teacher now and making a difference in kids' lives in this way. So,
shout out to Tim Belmont. Thanks for joining us. Hey, and Mel saying hey too. Mel A joining us from Colombia, originally from Australia. Always love when Mel jumps in the chat. It's interesting that you mentioned you shifted gears, but you really didn't lose the faith. Same thing here. I just got into it, and I can remember I was taking this class called the Historical Critical Method, and I'm like, this is so boring. I hate this. Like, is this what this is like? And so I got to do something else, right? I'm not going to spend any more time doing this. And then narrowed it down to teaching and the medical field, and started taking classes for both. And the rest is history. Once I started taking that first teacher course, like, okay, this is where I need to be. And thankfully, I had a great program, great mentors at my first site that really encouraged my use of tech. We weren't one-to-one starting out, but we used a tech cart. I was always checking out the Chromebooks and bringing those into the classroom, and I was known instantly as the techie teacher, and that really helped gain a foothold for me in the world of education. And it's just taken off from there. But I want to transition back to you and Fresh Air at 5. Tell us a little bit about that and how it came about.
All right. Fresh Air at 5 is my podcast that's been in existence. The podcast has been alive since January 5th of this year. And I want to give credit to Mr. Nessie, Chris Nessie, for helping me take that step, taking that leap and press and publish. And I've got episode 22 coming out this coming Friday night at midnight. Awesome. So I'm 22 episodes in, one a week, and I got a crazy kind of format, Scott. Like, my format is not like what we're doing here. Like, I don't talk to people when I'm recording. Like, I listen in my ears with my headphones while I'm out on the street every morning at 5 o'clock a.m. in my neighborhood. And it all started off with me back in 2018. I was going to the gym, and I tried to get to the gym every morning by 5, right? Because that's when it opened, and then it was the least amount of impact on my family, and it was like hard to get to the gym some days. And if I was there at 5 after 8, it'd throw my morning off and my routine off, right? And I was paying the money and going, I got to find a different way to get my exercise that is not as expensive. I don't have to go to a location. And hey, what about right outside my door? So I got some new shoes to walk in, and I would, step out my door, and I put my headphones in, and I'm like, well, I was listening to music in the gym, but hey, there's educational podcasts that I can start listening to. And while I was doing that, I'm like, I'm listening to this stuff. What am I going to do about this? What am I going to do with this? And on Twitter, I started putting out like Adobe Spark post graphics with just what I was listening to. And then on April 16th of 2019, I thought, wow, what can I call this? And I thought, can I start a hashtag? Am I allowed to start a hashtag? like you don't know. Like, if you
right. What are the rules?
Like, who can start a hashtag? So I'm like, hashtag Fresh Air at 5, I said, and I just started that on April 16th of 2019. And so that started that going, and I was like putting a graphic on there. And then Jeff Gargis on Teach Better Talk one day was talking about how he would use his phone and record a selfie video that you can put on Twitter. So I reached out to Jeff and I said, what about this? How do you do that? And he says, well, you just press the, Twitter live. And I'm like, okay, that's pretty raw. Like, I'm like, there's not a chance to back that up. Right. And so what else can I do? I looked about that, and I thought, wow, I can actually upload a video. So I'm like, I'm going to start taking selfie videos. So with my iPhone, this is my recording device and my headphones that are in my ears. I hold my phone up in the morning as I'm walking, and I got, the background, the street. I'm using my Bluetooth cheap headphones as my recording device for my audio. And I would put a daily video up. So I started doing that, right? And I started doing that since, I don't know when. That was probably March or April of last year, maybe February or so. I remember it was cold and dreary when I started doing that. And then as time went on, I'd listen to podcasts and I'd reflect and talk about the things I was learning. And I started to get to know some people, just because of that reach out. And yourself, for example, right? Like, we just reach out and we would connect. And it was like, I hear your voice all the time, and it's like, we're having this kind of conversation, but we're nowhere near each other, right? We are not actually interacting live back and forth, but it was kind of there. And Chris Nessie, Christmas of last year in December, called me out on his podcast and said, Bryon, we should talk about you starting a podcast. And I'm like, I've been thinking about it. And on my website, the title on my website is Matter of Learning, from the chemistry and the teaching. And I was like, okay, so if I'm going to do an interview podcast, what kind of questions am I going to ask? Because, Tim Cavey's got his series of questions, and, other people have their series of questions. And I'm like, what can I do? Right. And so I was trying to figure this out. And Chris says, you know what, Bryon, people would like to hear actually what you have to say on Twitter every day. And like, if you put that together in a 1-week episode, and I'm like, really? Who's going to listen to this? Right. And so he worked with me over Christmas of this past year in 2020 and spent probably 3 hours with me, helping me get set up on Anchor and taking my first chunk of audio content. And on June 5th, we published it. And I was invited by him to join the Teachers on Fire Podcasters Summit for 2021, the very first one of 2021. And he said, Bryon, just come on in the room. And so I got there and I knew Tim Cavey, and I met the likes of Eric Geis and Dr. Dan Kreines and some others, Tim Stevenson from Science 360 podcast. And I was like the new guy in the room, and I'm sitting there going, these guys are like my heroes, right? I'm there with Chris. I think AJ was there. AJ Bianco was there, and just the group of people that was there, and Tim Cavey. And I'm like, wow. And they're like, okay, so this is what I'm doing with my podcast. This is what I'm doing with mine. And Chris is like, and this is Bryon, and he's going to publish a podcast like probably tonight, and we're going to get started. So
pressure's on.
Yeah, I know the pressure's on, right? And so right after that, he spent a live coaching session with me, and we did it in StreamYard. And if you can go find that live coaching session on his YouTube channel, where we went through all the switches in Anchor to be able to set that up, right? So I can get you that link later if you want that, Scott, to put in your show notes.
Yeah, we can add that to the show notes. That'd be awesome. And
and so that was the settings for getting it going, how to take and put it onto Apple Podcast. There we go. There's some people that are in there. There's Chris.
I pulled this up because we got Chris Nessie right there.
Yeah.
So great guy. And I mean, he influences so many podcasters. I think of him as like an OG. So that's so cool that he kind of took you under his wing for a little bit there and got you going.
Yes.
What was that experience like? Like how did you feel emotionally with
once
that?
I press send on the very first episode, it was like, this is okay. It's that easy to do this, right? It's like, it's not hard to do this. And I had to get a routine down for how I do my recording processing, how I process the recording, right? Because I record every day, and I record my stuff every day. So I'm doing my recording every day. It takes me I do walk for about an hour every morning. I listen to 1 to 3 podcasts at 1.5 times speed to get the content in so I can have content for my podcast. But it all started out as a way of me being accountable for my exercise, right?
Wow.
And now it's accountability for my own professional development, right? And like my personal professional development. Like, this is about my profession. This is not about my position at this school so much as it is me growing in my understanding of leadership, educator stories, what makes people tick, and educational technology, because I'm crazy about educational technology. But there's more to it than just the technology, right? And I started off listening to technology podcasts, and that's how I got into the educational technology thing with EdTech Team. And I went to the very first Google Summit and was part of that. And I went, whoa, there's all these tools. But then I learned that it was more about education, right? And that you can have these tools, but if you don't have pedagogy and andragogy to go along with it, that last one is about adult learning styles. It doesn't matter, right? So, so that's where Fresh Air at 5 came from. Again, a little bit of my origin story of that. And it's exciting to talk about it because it's not been very long, ago that started. So,
wow, that is quite the story. And I love how committed you are. And I've heard you talk about it personally with me, but also on other podcasts with your origin story about your connection with Sarah Johnson, Balance Like a Pirate, and her work and staying committed to fitness and balancing everything. And one thing I really liked about your episode with Fonz on My EdTech Life was you were talking about the need about 18 months into the profession to really engage in self-care. And I think you said that was about 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that and let us know kind of where you're at with the self-care now, because it ties right in.
Yeah. So when I started off, I was young. We had a family of, by the time I started teaching, we had our 3 kids. They were young. The oldest was like 5 years old going into grade 1, and youngest was just born. And, you're running at Mach speed being a dad and being new at this career. And it takes, you're putting it in pretty fast and furious. And you forget about yourself, because my role is to be a servant to my family, right? Like we are there to serve our family. And, I got my master's of science in chemistry, and that was hard. That was really hard. But at the time I had my responsibility was to get through school so that my wife and I, that we just gotten married, could start our life. And then when I changed careers and started teaching, it was a different level of gravity, because the content wasn't harder than chemistry. It was different than chemistry, and that education is a different way of thinking. And I just wasn't sure whether I was going to make it, right? And I didn't know if I was going to make it. So I started teaching, and I was in a regular bricks and mortar school. And one of the teachers, who's actually retiring this year from our district, pulled me aside and said, "How are you taking care of yourself?" Right. And I'm like, I don't know. How do you have time to take care of yourself? Right. We're going crazy here. It's moving really fast. And I had, people in my church and my close friends that were there for me. And I made sure that I started talking more about how things were going and attending to myself a bit more. I didn't have a formalized path for how to take care of myself, other than being aware, and that awareness in your head of this needs to be a priority. I didn't know how to put it in place. And you know what? I settled into teaching and figured a way to, care for myself a little bit by having some boundaries, right? I started in the online school, our distributed learning school. At the time, it was all paper. So I couldn't take work home with me the same way I do now with having the computer right there. And that helped put some boundaries in place. And I started figuring that I needed to just have those boundaries. Otherwise, it was going to eat me up. And then in 2018, I recorded with Tim Cavey for the very first podcast, episode 33 of Teachers on Fire. And that was just an awesome opportunity and just an honor to be asked, right? To be on his podcast. And Tim and I talked, and we recorded it, and I go back and I go, "Ooh, I shouldn't have said some of those things." It's like, whoa, you can actually. And it lives on. It doesn't go away, right? So my pick on Netflix at the time, I'm like, I should have picked something else. It was Riverdale, the Archie and Betty and Veronica series, right? And that was the one thing that I'm like, should I have said that? But I said it, and it's out there, and I just said it again. But the episode right after, I started listening to Tim's podcast, and I didn't do that before he asked me, was Sarah Johnson. And I remember I was painting my bathroom. And I was listening to the podcast. She's like, and I got this book, and I've been running for 1,800 days at this point every day. And I thought, consistency, that's interesting, right? And so that's around that time is when I started going to the gym in the morning, and I just listened to that and went, that's really great. And I'm like, I'm going to buy the book. So I bought the book. And it started collecting dust on my shelf because I didn't have time to read it. And I'm like, it's about balance, right? And I'm like, it took me about 6 months to finally, or maybe 4 months to finally start reading the book. And I took it seriously. And, her writing with Jessica Cabine and Jessica Johnson, they challenged you to stop and take stock of your life, right? And slow down and actually think about what's important, what's your passion, what's your personal life look like, professional and positional. So they got the 4 Ps in there, and how do we balance those things? And is it about balance or blending, right? And we will focus on one or more of those at one time, and something's going to get neglected. And if it's your personal, that's going to take a big hit and cause other things to suffer. So that was an eye-opening for me, and that propelled me to actually take self-care really seriously. If you look at my tweets, most of my tweets in the past while have been about, like at the very bottom, I put hashtag bounce like a pirate. The reason I do that is because that book made a difference in my life. And I want to give her a shout out every time. Sarah Johnson and team, they're amazing. And Sarah's got her podcast, the In Awe podcast.
Such a good one.
Right. And just it's so fantastic to see the work that she's doing to talk about caring for yourself. Right. So.
Yeah, such an uplifting person too. I've been blessed in my life to be able to connect with her via Tim Cavey. Tim's a great connector. Connected me with Sarah, with Chris Nessie a little more intimately, and others as well. It's been really nice to have that, and she's given me some really good advice. As well. So that's been such a benefit. And I'm so happy to have her in my PLN, and Tim and you as well. I found you via Tim through your episode. And I think you listened to my episode 96 of Teachers on Fire. And we started following each other shortly after and connecting. And then we discovered we connected via Adobe Spark, which is awesome. And I want to kind of switch gears and get to that. Did you make that graphic that you have in the background with Adobe Spark?
Yes, I did. So if you look in the background, if you're on YouTube, you can see, that picture there, right? And
tell me about that. That's kind of freaking me out. I'm realizing I've seen it before, but you're like literally sitting on the edge of a cliff, right? Like that's not Photoshopped.
No, that's not Photoshop. That's actually a picture of me. And we were out hiking in BC here up at the Coquihalla Summit Recreation Area, which is about an hour and a half away. And we were hiking that day. It was September 8th of 2020. And we went on our hike and climbing up there, my buddy Ryan, him and I, we were, he's my best friend. And we were hiking up to the summit of Needle Peak, which is just above 2,000 meters in elevation gain. And we're hiking up, and there's this big rock. That is one big rock. That's not even a cliff attached. This rock is sitting on the side of this mountain, and he's like, let's go take pictures on that thing. So he went out there first, and he's more daring than I. And I kind of crawled out there on my hands and knees and sat down. He's like, okay, I'm going to take this picture. And we've hung out long enough that he's like, I'm going to take this picture because you could use it for something else. The way the blue sky is on the left-hand side and all that. Yeah. So that was a picture. That was like an epic hiking picture. Like we did a lot of hiking, and that's one of my favorite pictures. Yes, you need to come to Canada, Scott, and see some of this stuff. So anyhow, there's that picture. But then I took that picture into Adobe Spark Post, which is one of my favorite web tools because it's accessible on my phone. It's accessible on my computer. It's accessible from anybody's computer that I can get to my account. And I put that graphic and these words in there and my Fresher at 5 logo, which I also made with Adobe Spark Post. So I put that in there, and that's a graphic that I made, and I share that tool with my students here in my classroom, and my students that are in grade 11, 10 and 11, they use Adobe Spark almost every class that I'm with them, right? I could dig into the more expensive Adobe products and other graphics products, but because of the accessibility and the freeness of Adobe Spark, that's why we use it. So,
yeah, let me pull it up on the screen. I have my account ready to go here. So this is kind of what it looks like when you log in, or what it could look like. And hey, there's your promo right here. And you can use a template. You can make your own.
Yeah.
One of the things I really like that they've added, hopefully it'll load a little faster here, is this layer option that I sometimes see. I don't know. Do you know how to pull it up? Normally it's right here for me. I'm not seeing it right now.
Yeah, you need to click on one of the objects in your slide.
Okay, here it is. So I asked for this about 2 years ago because I said, you know what? You guys have a great product here.
Yeah.
But there's too big of a gap between Adobe Spark Post and Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, and you need to bridge the gap. You don't necessarily need another program, but have something in there that really showcases the different layers and the stacking, because all professional graphic design really comes down to layers and embedding like presets and stuff. When you get good and you start building out your body of work, you have all these presets. And so you go in and you're throwing in these filters. Now, initially, when you're starting out, that takes a ton of time. But essentially, if you do it right, all of that's going to be done in your kind of grad work, but before you're done graduating, you're going to have all those filters. You can also buy them, but honestly, it's better if you learn to make them, because then you'll, like with coding, you'll learn to manipulate those filters and get them to do what you want to do more precisely. And then you won't have to keep buying. You'll be able to not just consume, but create. And now with the ability to share and libraries right here, you could start doing that. So I'm really looking forward to these newer features. I'll admit, I'm not sharing out libraries yet and doing that, but I'm learning from our buddy Claudio Zavala. So shout out to Claudio. And speaking of him, how about you show off that shirt you're wearing?
This is my new creative shirt that just came in the mail just yesterday. So I'm super psyched about that. And there's a story to that too, that, Claudio, when he posted that, hey, the store's open, come and get a shirt, get some swag, some merchandise. I went to the store and this was about 4 weeks ago, probably 3 weeks ago. And I went to the store and it said shipping and it said what country? And it said United States. And I went, dude,
I remember that post.
Dude, I'm right here. I'm in Canada, right? And within 20 minutes, Claudio responded right now. And he's like, hey, Bryon, you can now order your shirt, right? And so he changed it so that Canada was an option for shipping, and it arrived in the mail yesterday. So sweet. Fawn's got his shirt too yesterday, last week. So,
so shout out to Fawn's. We were mentioning the program earlier, Fawn's. I just listened to it today in preparation. So a lot of good stuff. You dug out some good stuff about Bryon that I hadn't heard before. So that's a sign of a great podcast host, being able to kind of get that. That's something I've really tried to work on and really pay attention to. And I'm going to mess up her name. I want to say it's Debbie Millman. I found her podcast from Seth Godin. She had him on, and one of the things that he noted about her is how thorough she is. And I listened to more and more episodes of her, and consistently the guests were saying that. They're like, how did you know that? I forgot I wrote that. And she's like, oh yeah, it's like chapter 7 in your book where you wrote about your husband. And they're like, oh, okay.
I know, right?
Yeah, pretty cool. Do you want me to add this to the screen, this thing you pulled up? Is this your Spark?
Yeah, this is my Spark, and I can put it up there, and I'm going to show you a couple things that we got going on here. So this is my Spark, and this is my Fresh Air at 5, covers for my podcast, and my logo that I've got right here, and my new logo here that I created. Oh, this is going to take a bit to load. Is it going to take a bit? It might. But how we can iterate and duplicate our designs. So that we don't have to be creating from scratch every time, right? And that's a big thing for being expeditious in how we do this. You know what, Scott? This is taking too long, so let's just stop sharing the screen there.
Okay. Yeah, just kind of walk us through, like verbally, maybe.
Yeah, for sure.
Might kind of see. Sorry, I hit the wrong item. There we go.
No problem. So part of I was talking to Danny Leeming out of the Kootenays. He's a fellow educator here in British Columbia. And him and I, we spent a couple sessions having a morning chat about just design and about ways to do things. And he said one of the things he teaches his students is to make a copy of every design that they do so that they can always go back to a previous, right? And call it a version number. Like we see this every day with software, right? Like iOS 14 or whatever it is for the, the new operating system for my iPhone. And everything that we have has a number on it. And getting into the habit, it's in a habit you have to develop of making a version copy of something to make before you make a modification of it, right? That's called good science. That's like chemistry. Like, you only change one thing at a time and you write down all those things that you have. So that you can go back and follow along with what you're doing. And so, Scott, yours is up there. And if you go to those little three dots in the top of one of your posts, click there, you can see the third line down is make a duplicate. So it's going to make an exact copy of it. And if you press duplicate, it calls it copy at the end. So this is where you put a version number at the end, and then you have a new version like 1.1, 1.2, and so on like that. And as far as a design process, and this is, okay, I'm not a graphic design guy like you, Scott. So I don't have the same level of training, but you can go back to a design, or you can, make a copy and make a change to it and see how it looks different. And this is something that I've been working on with my students here in my classroom. And we made stickers recently, and I had them go through and not make like one logo and call it good. I'm like, you make a logo and they're like, well, it's good. And I'm like, well, no, I want you to make a change to that. Well, why, Mr. Carpenter, do I have to make a change to that? I'm like, because you might like it better, right? And so working through the iteration process, that's a big part of why I like Spark, because it's all web-based, it's all there, and we can make a copy of something, and then we can go back to what that other previous version was. So it's a design thing, and I think it's a great idea.
That's huge. You nailed a key concept in design thinking and graphic design, right? Mm-hmm. The different versions. And then also, like, when you are, I'm blanking right now on the proper technical term for it, but essentially when you're showcasing your work to a client, for example, you don't have just one design. You have several different designs, and then they'll pick out of those designs and maybe pick elements like, oh, I like the tree in this one. I like the sand in this one. I like the color scheme here. And then you maybe go through different iterations, just like in the design thinking process. It's basically the graphic design process, or kind of the life process when you're learning something, right?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. So no, and it's true. That's like your portfolio. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, there's like a technical term. It's not coming to me right now. That's what happens when you start getting these gray hairs and you get more kids, and you catch a teacher at the end of the year. I did want to point out a super fun thing that I do. So, I'm locked into that file. I'll go back. But right here, like, let's say I'm not sure about this font, or you're doing the different versions, I'll go into the project menu and I'll see these side by side. So I did this for this Celebrate Ed chat that I hosted last week, and I'll just go find new style and be like, ooh, that I can't even read that. And I'll just kind of flip through this. It's going a little slow right now because we're running the podcast right now. But it's neat to see it kind of switch up. I can also play with the opacity. I can add a shape around it, right? Because it kind of blends in, and then I can go to the shape. Ooh, I don't like that orange color. I can grab my little dropper here. I really like this purple, and boom, there we go. And it really stands out. I can make it a little more opaque, and just kind of play with it there, and, mess with the fonts. Maybe I'm not liking any of the selected ones. I might have to go in. Sometimes you just need to go in and play with things. Sometimes you have to kind of throw out some of those elements of design and theory and just see what looks pleasing to the eye. So this is horrendous, obviously. And sometimes that happens.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
And then that's why you have that backup.
That's right. You have a copy of it.
You have the undo button here. And you can just go back to where you were. How do you use this typically in the class?
I teach the kids about using Adobe Spark posts to make graphics. Like that picture of me sitting on the cliff there. There's a cool feature. There's a cool feature in Spark posts where you can remove the background. So early on in the year, I took that picture in September, and I think it was by November I had an assignment or a task where I said, sit beside Mr. Carpenter. That was what it was called. And so I had them sit on a table, take a picture of themselves, and then remove the background and perch themselves right on the rock beside me, right? And it's like they weren't there. So I'm teaching them tricks of like photo manipulation and like making things like look really real that aren't real. And I don't know if that's a good idea, but I guess it's a good idea. Like we're teaching them how to be creative, right? And so I start doing things like that. And at Christmas time in winter break, like before winter break, during the winter season, I have build a snowman in Adobe Spark. So get a winter scene in the background, then go get some icons and you go get a circle, you stick it on there. You get that circle, you duplicate it, make it smaller, right? And you continue to put icons on there to build up what looks like a snowman, right? And so that's something that I've done with them. And it's little things like that that develop their skills with the tools within Adobe Spark so that by the time we get to this time of year, my students are making logos, right? Like they're building logos and using the different parts of the tools that, are more advanced, right? I watch a lot of Claudio Zavala Jr.'s YouTube channel, and every week I get a notification and Claudio has a new video that he's put out. And the Spark ones intrigue me a lot because it's a free tool. We can do a lot of things with this tool. There's my logo for my podcast that's there. If you go to my Twitter page for myself, or actually for my podcast, at Fresh Air at 5, you can see, I've got a new logo that's there incorporating the different components. And it's about the iterative process. And my students today, they were using it today in class. And I use it for graphic design. And we need something for our newsletter. And I don't have to teach them how to go and build something. We need a graphic to go in the corner or something like that. And they know how to do it. So does that answer your question, Scott?
Yeah, totally. And another great shout out to Claudio Zavala. He has amazing videos, and I want to draw the listeners' attention to one of his latest ones. He has this series. I think I'm slightly off on the title, but it's essentially behind the scenes where he shows you exactly his studio, his setup, what he's doing, how he gets this effect. And I just watched episode 2. Phenomenal. So if you want to get super cool lighting, which I do not have, I have a ring light up here. Here's the difference when I turn it off. It's a bit darker, right? I always have this window. It's about placement. I don't have good placement. So I'm working on that too. Like, hey, this is my office. How can I change and transform this super tight room? So he showed in that episode how he has this wood looking wall, but it's not real wood. They're just like vinyl tiles that he's put up, and he has links to everything. And if you miss something, you have a question, he is awesome. He'll get back to you if you reach out on social media. He's just a great, loving educator, loves helping people, and he has a big heart and a genuine zeal for learning and teaching and ed tech, just like us.
That's right.
And kind of transitioning, is that hard question. We were talking about earlier today, and I'm going to throw it up on the screen because I threw it out to the Twitterverse here as well. Let's see if it comes up. So the question essentially is, why do you think educators, not just teachers, but those involved in education, are divided on issues and how things are done in education and how we can kind of change that? I honestly thought the pandemic would change all of that. Like when it happened, of course, I was super bummed, but I always try and take a very positive outlook on things and not get stuck and downtrodden with the negative. I always try to find the positive in everything. Otherwise, I'll just despair and nothing will get done, and woe is me will be the mantra. And I don't want to live my life like that. So I thought, hey, we're going to really come together during this trying time. And I think we really did. In my district, I saw that initially. A group of us got together and we gave up and forewent our spring break, even though we really needed it. I think we were feeling the effects of the pandemic, like the unknown, the scare, because we really didn't know anything in March of last year. And we gave up that spring break and we worked for a solid 8 days on presentations and professional developments. And then we gave those for 8 days and we delivered 110 webinars. And I've said it before on the show, it still just blows my mind. Like, that is so many. And these were like jam-packed quality, like everybody gave their best. And then some of those teachers that learned, they took those PDs and then they delivered them to their site. So you had teachers helping teachers, just everybody was in the trenches, and it was amazing. And I saw that on Twitter too. Like, I knew everything that was going on kind of everywhere at once, and I was so entrenched in it. And then I don't know, around May that quickly faded, or by May, so a couple months into it, one person had said on Twitter, let me see if I can quote the person correctly here. Unprofessional Development Podcast said, this just in, educators are humans. Try and get 5 people to agree on a day and time and a place to eat. People have different values and preferences and experiences that shape those. And, I totally agree. Every time I go to eat with my family, like my mom, my brothers, and my sister, that's how things are, right? We can't decide. It basically just comes down to just simply picking or somebody. We nominate somebody to pick, like, okay, Scott, today's your day to pick. You're picking. Otherwise, we'll be deciding for like 10 minutes, and we'd rather just eat at a place and have each other together and enjoy one another's company. What do you kind of think? What do we maybe need to focus on in education today to kind of make things better? I don't think there's like a quick fix. No. Quick fixes never work. I think it's going to be, something we need to focus on long term and really just commit to. But, I think being the change you wish to see in the world, of course, it's got to start with me and with you, and coming together and our PLN. But what's your take? What's maybe one practical step in a positive direction that educators can take?
I saw a video, and I can't remember who it was by, but it was basically called Be Kind. And be kind, right? Like in that mindset of kindness, can change a whole lot of things. It gets around to how do we share resources. It gets around how do we help each other, and how do we care for each other, right? And we talk about SEL and our students and our social emotional learning with our students, but we as educators need to take stock of our own social emotional learning, because if we don't, we are ticking time bombs walking into classrooms. And if we go off, that's not good for yourself. That's not good for the kids in the room when that happens. And, we need to make sure that we're taking care of each other. I remember last year, I think it was in April or May, Scott, I reached out to you and I said, how are you doing? Because, I heard a little shakiness in your voice on your podcast, right? And I'm like, we got to do things like that, right? That's me reaching out to you in California, right? Because I heard it on your podcast. But what about the teacher right next door to you and down the hall, right? Like, what about your principal? Do you ever walk into your principal's office and go, how are you doing? Right? Because that's, you're Are you questioning their leadership? No, you're trying to take care of them as a human being, right? And I'm not going to say that, just because you ask that question that they're going to be crack wide open and share and, get all blubbery.
Right.
Like, no, but to go, I'm a human being that cares about another human being, and we're in this thing that's really, really hard, and that's what I saw at the very beginning of COVID. And as we got into summer and I've had a focus on like self-care and connected with Brad Hughes, connected with
amazing
Lindsay.
guy. I really enjoy Brad. Sorry to interrupt. I'm like a huge Brad fanboy now.
Yeah. And Lindsay Titus and, Sarah Johnson and Livia Chan.
Yeah.
And how, like we need to focus on self-care. Like SEL for the adults, like we got to take care of each other because, there's a whole lot of politics in education. And if we're not well in our heads, we can't have, meaningful conversations.
No, you're absolutely right. And speaking of self-care, I think you've noticed recently, like I've toned it down the last 2 weeks. Because I haven't done anything. We're remodeling in the rest of the house. So my 3D printers are actually down. They're not plugged in right now. They're out of the way while we're doing remodeling. So I haven't printed anything in 2 weeks. But prior to that, I was printing a ton of that stuff. And a big part of that is I'm using it for work. Yeah, it's education related. But like we do with the podcast, right? It kind of fills me. It's part of my self-care and sharing out and being on Twitter and connecting is huge. And I'm really glad you did reach out. It was nice to have somebody reach out because I try and do that. It's really interesting. I try and do that for other people, but those same people don't necessarily do it for me. And it's not a bad thing. I don't think it can really work that way. Like sometimes, but I don't know. I think that like the love and kindness behind reaching out to somebody, the genuine compassion for other people, it works if you kind of spread it. If it just is in a bubble, it just kind of circulates and it gets kind of stagnant. Like if we're not learning, so it's better to kind of pay it forward. So when somebody gives me a gift, like a lot of people have just been so generous. Somebody gave me coffee when I really needed it. I was having a bad day and it was already like 7 a.m, woke up and I don't even remember what happened that day. That just goes to show you how great this gift was. And I got a coffee in my inbox. And I went down to Starbucks, cashed that out, and my day turned around, right? It was like the worst day ever when I woke up. But then, an hour later, 7 a.m., I need a quick mental break. Let me hop on Twitter real quick and just kind of check in. I need some good news right now. And there it was sitting in my inbox. And this week I shared a video just thanking my PLN. So that goes out to you. That goes out to everybody that listens, because there's never enough room to really put everybody in there. But I sincerely mean it. There's no way I would have gone through this pandemic, at least professionally, without our Twitter PLN. But even personally, so many people have reached out and just really kept me going. And people have modeled, like you mentioned, so many people from the Teach Better teams, Jeff Gargis, Ray Hewart, their team, everything they're doing and have been building. It's like, wow, they're not only surviving right now, and they're thriving. And I've had those moments, and really being able to attach myself to people like that, who kind of can be my cheerleader when I need it the most, when, that imposter syndrome or self-doubt kind of tries to creep in. You're like, no, I got this. And I have this community behind me. It makes all the difference. So like you said, don't be afraid to reach out to not just your Twitter PLN or social media PLN, but the teacher next door. Reach out to your admin. I did that with my boss. I could tell he was getting slammed with emails. And I said, hey, kick some of those my way. I'm busy too, but let me share the load a little bit. You're really getting hammered right now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that made a difference. I would like to think it did anyways. And it sure did make me feel
Yeah.
good. You don't give to feel good, but it's like a natural byproduct. When you have an impact, you're like, yes, my efforts were not in vain. I did something, right? There's that sense of accomplishment.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
yeah. And
Another thing I think that's important.
yeah,
I think another thing that's important in this time, we're talking about our social emotional learning and our self-care. The pandemic has really stressed all of us. And this is this global thing that has affected all of us and not in the same way, right? It's really
right.
challenged education. It's challenged our use of technology. And we have grown a little bit or a lot for some, depending on who you are in your digital literacy. And I would hope that we don't revert back to default after the masks can come off and we, get back to whatever normal is in the future, right? And that we keep some of the tools and the techniques that we've used now for connecting with our students, do that same kind of thing in the classroom and, don't let that go.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah. Hey, Chris Nessie jumping in, folks, for those that are listening later on after the live podcast. Great to have you, Chris. And we did give you a shout out earlier. Thanks for helping to jumpstart Bryon with Fresh Air at 5 and expanding that into a full blown podcast, because it is really dynamic. And you're so right, Bryon. Going back, we can't forget. I know it's an overused term, but it's the one most people are familiar with. The give grace, get grace, right? Before the pandemic, if there was a mistake, I'll be honest. If somebody bailed on me on the podcast, like I was like on time, like I'm there early every time, very regimented. I get up at this time, I go to bed at this time. All that's out the window, right? You experienced it, right? I gave you a YouTube link and I'm thinking I gave you the StreamYard link and then I'm having trouble logging in and then my code says it expired, right? This year's nutty. I spent all of yesterday working on something I had zero intention of working on, and it wasn't really on my radar, but I needed to take care of that thing right away. And then that took away from the other things I need to do then. And it seems like most days are like that. So I give grace and I definitely accept the grace. And I think I used to really embrace the power of yes, like saying yes to things and stretching myself and challenging myself. But now I also do that with no, like not right now. Generally, it's like, I would love to do that, but right now is not a good time for me. Or let's look at this months in the future or after the pandemic kind of thing, or after summer. And, touching back on balancing like a pirate, right? This work-life balance. I think now more than ever, you really have to kind of push yourself up with the self-care, self SEL. Like where are you at mentally? Are you in a good place? Are you constantly checking that? Because if you're not right now, you very easily could slip, not to, be like a fear mongerer, but it really has to be there in the forefront of your mind right now. Because for the foreseeable future, we don't know when this is going to end, this extra stress. And it's different. We have, we may have loved ones or, people that we have to take care of that are having a harder time. I know in different ways, we've been hit, due to the pandemic, even though I haven't experienced COVID, but my wife, for example, lost her uncle and even though that didn't affect us long term, it affects her mom, right?
Yeah.
Which affects us and, affects the rest of the family. It's super hard. And we see that with our students and those we serve. And it's just a real challenge right now. Chris Nessie's saying, can we cancel stress? Yes,
absolutely.
That's the key. Canceling it. You heard it here first, folks, via Mr. Chris Nessie here.
Everything else has been canceled this year. Might as well cancel the stress too.
And Tim's agreeing with me, saying no can be extremely liberating.
Yep.
I agree. And our buddy Fonz agreeing as well. Totally acceptable. I do hate saying no, and he's absolutely right. You're right, Fonz. It does shock people, like, no, but really, if I'm not leaving something in the tank for tomorrow, if something comes up like what happened yesterday and I just have to completely shift gears, I need something in the tank. Otherwise, that's when people start really breaking down and getting into like a negative cycle. And I can't do that. I have kids that depend on me. I have my community that depends on me. And, my PLN, I take it seriously. I try to not just consume, but try and give back in little ways. And it's really been different. I'm putting you on the spot. Honest answer. I've been trying something different on Twitter lately with the daily kind of prompts and questions and thoughts. And sometimes they're a little lighthearted. Today was a little heavier, right? That's a tough question, or one where people might have an opinion, but really you don't want to put it out there because of backlash, right?
Right.
What do you think about those? Have they been resonating with you? Is that appropriate? I'm like an ed tech guy and I'm posting all this stuff and it's not really ed tech stuff.
We're human beings and we're educators. And I think that just because it's not ed tech and we're an ed tech guy, that we're human beings and we're educators and we're more than just ed tech, right? Like, so it does resonate with me. I haven't participated in any of those discussions, Scott. It's been super busy here. So, that's me being honest, but I don't think there's anything wrong with putting that out there, because if we're growing and caring about people, we have to have a place and platform that we can talk about these things. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah. I want to comment real quick on what Fonz is saying. Givers need to set limits because takers rarely do. Yeah. There's that too, right? Normally, I'm definitely a giver. I tried this social experiment with myself in college and I only made it 11 days. I remember back, I tried to just really just not be me, not be giving, not be nice really. And, I was kind of mean, really. I was what I thought other people were like generally to me. And it was interesting. It was kind of freeing, but I couldn't stand myself. I absolutely hated it. And I was really unhappy, even though things went my way. I got my way completely, like being a jerk, but I hated it. And I could only do it for 11 days. I'm not saying I don't have my moments. Far from perfect. Just ask my wife. She'll let you know, or the kids, right? It's easy to be okay, during a podcast, but, hey, 24 hours in a day, I definitely mess up often. I'm with Chris Nessie here, putting out contents and tweets that fill your bucket, and they have been. So I think those questions have been, for me, the podcasts, are for me too. I honestly say, like, even though there's a lot of podcasts and it seems like everybody's doing a podcast now, which isn't true. There's still room for many more podcasters out there. So if you're listening, you're on the fence, start a podcast, reach out to Bryon or myself or Chris Nessie. And, I get so much. I consider this PD, or professional development, for myself whenever I do it, and tying it in with what Chris is saying give, it'll eventually come back to you. Yeah, by sharing. It's like in sharing, I receive.
Yeah.
But the key part here, I clicked on the wrong one. You can't do it with expectations, and I think that's key. There's a greater gift in giving without expecting anything in return. And when I was studying biblical theology, there's this Greek word for love, agape. And the way I described it, it's probably not the technical definition, but the way I internalized it is it's a complete selfless giving of yourself for the sole benefit of another person. Yep. So not expecting anything in return. You're giving everything for that person completely without expecting anything. And I think you got to do that. But if you can't do it all the time if you don't have anything in the tank. As we close, what kind of advice would you maybe kind of sprinkle over our conversation to keep something in the tank, or to kind of uplift yourself if you're kind of teetering a little bit, you're close, like, hey, if I say yes to this thing, or I do one more thing, or one more thing goes wrong, I'm gonna fall beneath this comfortability line here.
Give yourself grace and say no a little bit more than you do if you're running out of energy, because you got to take care of yourself. Because if you're not well, then stress is gonna eat your body, and you're gonna get sick and all that stuff. So
yeah, and get out there, and if you can, right? Because I know for some, it's more difficult, but get up, get out in nature. I think what you're doing is great. You're out in nature. I love the videos, love the pictures. Just you're in a beautiful part of the country and the world. Yeah. There's really no place like it. I see the things you post, the things Tim Cavey posts, and once COVID's kind of over and I can go up there, I think I just need to plan a trip and get some coffee and go on some walks with you guys, because I would love it. I love being immersed in nature. Completely.
For sure.
And I want to make sure everybody's following you. By the way, Miles is saying hi to you, Bryon.
Hey, Miles. Hey, Miles. I haven't listened to your joke lately, but Miles has got his little podcast called the Knock Knock Who's There podcast. Have you listened to it, Scott?
No, I haven't yet.
You got to go. Everybody should go subscribe. Everybody that's listening, go look for Knock Knock Who's There podcast. That's Chris and Miles. They tell a joke every 3 times a week, and it's probably just bringing joy to Miles. So good job, Chris, on lifting up Miles and teaching him this craft that you have that you're bringing to other people as well.
Yeah. No. Oh, here we go. He posted it. So looks like knocpod.com. So there you go, folks. So check out Mr. Nessie and Miles, and I'll be checking that out. It got posted wrong. So it's knocpod.com. Thanks.
That's right.
Knocpod.com. So I'm going to check that out. I want to make sure everyone's following you on Twitter. They can follow you at Bryon Carr, spelled BRYONCAR. Thanks so much, Bryon. I really appreciate you, brother. The beard's looking better than ever.
Thanks, Scott. It's great to chat today, and fantastic to have a conversation. Glad you're there. Stay there and be there for people around you, because you're making a difference in the world too.
Yeah, and also check out Bryon Carpenter's podcast, Fresh Air at 5, on the podcast player of your choice. And don't forget to share them out, subscribe, and write a positive review on Apple Podcasts. That makes a big difference. And if you like this podcast as well, please do the same. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, guys.